Good morning again. Today we are going to discuss two important philosophical tools as part of the 10th lecture: abduction and analogy. So, I will first discuss with you what abduction is, how it is used in philosophy, and what is analogy, how do we use in arguments, especially in philosophy. You may be familiar with these terms, but then they may have specific meanings in the context we are discussing now. Because abduction normally in English has another meaning, but today we are not going to discuss that general sense of the meaning, but something that is very specific to philosophy. So let me begin now with abduction. I'll begin with this simple example to make you understand. The police finds a man who is found hanging in a remote area in a little cabin that he has in the woods, let's say, and doors, windows, all of them are locked from inside, and this man is hanging himself. Probably he is hanging himself in a fan, and there is also a suicide note written by that man, and the police finds that suicide note on the table that lies beside him. Now the question is, what would be the best explanation for these set of facts? Now, what are factual here is there is a man hanging in his fan in a cabin in a remote area, probably in the woods, and there is also a suicide note, and it is in his own handwriting, and then you find it near the table. Besides, the doors and windows are also locked from inside. These are the facts. So anybody who sees this can see this. So these are the different facts that you observe. So how do you explain this set of facts? In order to explain this set of facts, the American pragmatist philosopher called Charles Sanders Peirce, note his last name is Peirce, it is written P-E-I-R-C-E, but then it is pronounced Peirce. He says the best explanation can be given by using this particular tool called abduction, when many explanations are possible. More than one explanation is possible. These are facts. Now we cannot immediately conclude or explain these facts from one point of view. There are different points of view possible. And then what would be the best explanation possible? That is known as abduction. Now let us take this very case. Now on the very face value of it, by the very look, the fact that the doors and the windows are shut, the man death seems to be a case of suicide. But there are also other possible explanations. Perhaps the man was rehearsing a drama, a play about suicide, and locked the doors for privacy. As part of this rehearsing the drama, the note also is prepared and kept. And something terribly went wrong. He didn't choose to commit suicide. He ended up killing himself. This is possible. We cannot rule out this possibility. It is also possible that members of some terrorist groups, they have some highly advanced teletransporters. So using the teletransporters, one of the murderers, assassins, he beamed into the cabin and killed the man and set everything up to look that like a suicide, and then he beamed out without opening the door. So this is called a teletransporting technology. Okay, so without opening or closing the door, you just beam in and beam out. This is possible. It may be a remote possibility, still a possibility. You cannot rule it out. Or perhaps it could be the work of an evil spirit which is living in the forest, and therefore it magically entered the room, killed the man, then disappeared. Now, all these alternative explanations may seem funny, but each of it is consistent with the evidence. So, the fact that they seem funny, they seem a remote possibility does not mean that they are not consistent with evidence. So, it is very difficult from determining whether it is suicide or not only by the evidence that you have. So there is no one possible explanation. There are many explanations that are possible. Now this is a kind of an imaginative scenario, but in actual life scenario you would come across many such things. Therefore, Peirce said you need to use this tool called abduction, which is a process of reasoning. And what does this process of reasoning do? It helps us to decide which explanation of a given phenomena would include here all that is available for us to be observed. So, which would be we can decide by using this process of reasoning which explanation gives the best explanation. So, therefore, this is also called the argument to the best explanation. So, abduction is also referred to as the argument to the best explanation. So, this is the idea. Now, let us try and see how we can further analyze this idea. There are at least few components that you should have in your process of reasoning. The first component is you should look for the most simple explanation possible or the least complicated explanation. And this principle is called simplicity. This is part of the reasoning involved in abduction. You should try to use the least complicated explanation or the simplest explanation possible that requires very few and more direct causal sequences. Now, what do you mean by causal sequences? That which has a cause and an effect, and the effect flows from the cause as a sequence. And therefore, what matters is you need to look for few and more direct causal sequences. In other words, you make few claims about what exists which rely upon matters beyond the evidence as little as possible. Now, this idea of simplicity is already developed by William of Ockham, a medieval philosopher. Now, this is often known as Occam's razor. You know what is a razor? R-A-Z-O-R. The razor is remove things that you don't want. Like you use razor for shaving unwanted hair on your face or elsewhere. So you need to apply that. Simplicity is that trying to remove things that are complicated. You don't, try to have as many few explanations as a few, few and more direct causal sequences as possible that could explain this. So this is what is known as simplicity. And of course, we are indebted to the medieval philosopher William of Ockham. Probably you have studied about him in your history of philosophy already. And the principle that he termed it as the razor, or therefore we call that as Occam's razor. The second principle that we employ in the process of reasoning is the principle of coherence. What would be a principle of coherence? Choose the explanation that is consistent with what experts about this particular scenario already believe it to be true. For example, if forensic science people, if people who are detectives, these are the experts in this scenario. So you choose that explanation which is consistent with experts who already believe this to be the case. Testability or predictive power. In other words, you have to choose the particular explanation that helps you to predict things that can be confirmed or disconfirmed. So you must be able to test it. You must be able to, there are different predictions that are possible, and these predictions you must be able to confirm, or in other words, it yields itself to be tested. That is why it is called testability or predictive power. If you cannot test it, then that is an explanation that you need to rule out, like in the case of that evil spirit. That's something that you cannot test. So it's best that you rule that out. Comprehensiveness in its scope. Choose the explanation which can explain the most of the facts and does not have many things unexplained, which is called the Lucians, things that are not explained. So I look for that particular explanation which gives you the, which can explain most of the factual things that you observe, and very little things or no things at all which is unexplained. Now, these are the 4 principles: simplicity, coherence, testability, and comprehensiveness. Now, even after applying all these principles, this tool, abduction, this particular process of reasoning, it fails to guarantee that our selection of explanations will necessarily be true. And even sometimes these principles may hinder us to know the truth of the matter. So it doesn't mean by this process of reasoning you have arrived at the truth, but it is still possible you may not get it, or it may even hinder the possibility of getting to know the truth. But be that as it may, this principle is better in order to choose one of the explanations rather than not having any principles at all or any such process of reasoning called abduction, even though it doesn't guarantee us the truth. Now, one of the things with Peirce's method of abduction is very appealing to pragmatists. Now, pragmatism is a particular school of philosophy, basically born in America, and pragmatists are basically concerned about verifiability approach, and they are very empirical in their approach. So because they find this as a useful method, so it's a pragmatism, therefore in a common sense we find it as something that works. Okay, this method, pragmatists look for a method that works. This works. But because of the fact that it may not necessarily guarantee us to know the truth of the matter, it is real trouble, or it is bothersome to those who have this particular approach called realism. So realists, on the other hand, think they think that science tells us the single nature of independent reality. So the reality is independent, and therefore it presents the realistic picture which is independent from us, and therefore it is true. But the pragmatists think, particularly by using these methods of abduction, they think that truth is not an independent reality, or truth can be irrefutably established. They don't think that truth can be irrefutably established. But they have the idea that we have to make the best of truth we can, given the limits of evidence and the demands of life. That is why it is pragmatic. This works. So go ahead with this explanation. It may not be necessarily true. So that is the best that we can do, because the limits of evidence and the demands of life make it difficult for us to get to know the truth. But this particular explanation seems to be the best explanation. and therefore let us go with that. So realists would be very much bothered by this particular approach. With this, I move to the next philosophical tool called analogy. In fact, we have not discussed in detail analogy, but as part of the arguments, I introduced this idea of analogy very briefly. So how we can use analogy as a supporting evidence in your argument. Now, analogy is something that is commonly used in arguments. It has at least two functions. We'll come to that. Already from the early Greek times till the modern times, philosophers use analogy in their writings. Plato, for example, uses analogy in his writings. For example, in Republic, Socrates, the main character in Plato's dialogues, obviously, he speaks about the just city as an analogy of justice of the human mind or human soul. So in fact, Republic is full of analogies. Analogy means there are certain relevant similarities between two things that you compare. So you try to compare one thing with another based on the relevant similarities. That is the analogy. You remember I gave one of the for identifying the claim and arguments. I did give one of the texts with an analogy. Socrates describes, for example, a cave where humans are kept in the dark about reality. You studied this already from the analogy of the cave, the myth of the cave. It's known as the analogy of the cave or the myth of the cave as part of your history of philosophy. Now, that is an analogy. So the fact that you don't know, you are in ignorance is compared to you being in a cave which is dark. So you don't know. So you are dark about reality. Literally, in other words, it means you don't know about reality yet. So he also compares, democracy with the analogy of ship of fools. Now, ship of fools means basically people who are in the ship, they have no idea about how to pilot a ship. But just because they have the power to pilot the ship that is given to them, they end up doing wrong things. Exactly what happens in democracy, according to Socrates. Socrates as described by Plato. So democracy therefore is analogous to ship of fools. So ship of fools is a particular kind of analogy which is helpful to make us understand about how democracy functions. So also the nature of transcendent reality is analogous to the sun. So these are all analogies. There are relevant similarities. So that is why these things are compared. These things you are familiar with Plato, so you know already by now. St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the most important and influential medieval philosophers, he used analogy, especially when he wants to formulate theses about God. Because you cannot explain God in literal language. It's very difficult. But we can attribute certain properties like good and one to God, and these properties, the way you attribute, is always done through a process called analogical prediction. So you have an understanding of good or experience of good. You don't have the direct experience of God unless, suppose if you are a real mystic and things like that, you have got a beatific vision, which is very unlikely for most of us. But then you transport this experience of good to the nature of God. So that is analogous. You have the idea of unity in your everyday experience, and then you transport it to the nature of God. So that is known as analogous prediction. So Thomas Aquinas uses it very frequently in the Summa Theologica. It is hard to get a grip on abstract ideas, but then we can easily relate it to what we are familiar with, like city, ship, sun, cave dwellers, all these are analogies. So the purpose of analogy therefore is very useful because it is possible for us to engage our imagination in philosophical thought. So in a certain sense, Jesus used a lot of analogies in his preaching. You know, the Son of Man, the kingdom of God can be compared to a sower. He goes out to sow seeds. It's an analogy. Otherwise, kingdom of God is an abstract idea. So it's very difficult for you to connect to that idea. But now it becomes very vivid when you think about a sower going to sow the seed. This is something I know. So therefore, analogy is very useful. So in the argument, people often use analogies so that it makes it reader friendly. Even in the court of law, analogy is used. This is especially when the lawyers cite precedents in making their case. What they do is they are appealing to arguments from analogy. When they cite the precedents, they would say this present case is analogous to the past case on which a verdict is already given. So the same kind of verdict should be now given by the court. So it is argued from the analogy. Why you should give the same kind of verdict that you have given in that case a couple of years ago? Because it is analogous. They have relevant similarities. So even in empirical science, reasoning sometimes draws itself from relying on analogies. For example, when there is a new phenomenon, you try to explain it by appeal to a law based on the past experience. So in other words, what we are doing is this new phenomenon is analogous to the phenomena of the past. In fact, David Hume, a British philosopher of the 18th century, claimed all our reasoning concerning matters of fact are founded on what he calls a species of analogy. It is one kind of or another within this analogy. So they are all analogy. You must now remember David Hume made a distinction between two types of knowledge, right? Matters of fact and relation of ideas, if you remember. Okay. Now, matters of fact, when it comes to the reasoning involved in that, are basically founded on analogy. Another philosopher, Immanuel Kant, German, very influential, he also makes a claim that analogy makes possible the representation of necessary connections among perceptions in ordinary language, ordinary experience. So you have very many different experiences, you perceive them, but then you also make this necessary connection. So what enables you to have the representation of this necessary connection is for Kant analogy. In brief, we can say analogy has two different functions in philosophy. They are helpful to make a point, to illustrate something, to help us discover something, to show something to us. For example, when Socrates compares good with the sun, he is making use of the image of sun that will help us to understand the arguments he makes about the good. So it is merely to illustrate a particular point. Analogies can also be integral part of an argument. It is not merely to illustrate a point, but it can serve as an integral part of an argument. And this is the example I gave you as part of your quiz. This famous argument from design. The British theologian William Paley has come up with this argument from design. This is one of the popular arguments to show God exists. Now the argument is very simple. You have a watch which is an artifact. So the moment you see a watch, an artifact, you realize that an artisan has made this. The existence of the watch depends on the artisan who made the watch. So the existence of the universe depends on the existence of the divine creator. Now here it is not merely to illustrate a point. This analogy of the watch is used as an integral part of the argument. The analogy here tries to show why we should conclude that the universe is a creator. So that's the reason. So it becomes an integral part of the argument. So analogy can merely to illustrate a point, or it can serve as an integral part of an argument. So you can use analogy, for example, in your argument, provided it is strong analogy. Therefore, we need to make a distinction between strong analogy and weak analogy. An analogy is strong when things compared, they share a large or decisive number of relevant similarities. You cannot have very little similarities between those things that are compared. And it cannot have too many of relevant differences. You should have many relevant similarities, but at the same time, it should not have many relevant differences. That would make it a strong analogy. You remember as part of explaining you to show what would be some of the fallacies that we may have in argument is one of the things I said about faulty analogy. You can go back and refresh that. I gave the example of apes, right? It is faulty because it is not strong. Weak analogy. When things compared, if they lack relevant similarities and if they have more relevant differences, then it will become a weak analogy. So analogy is very helpful. It can be integral part of your argument, provided it is a strong analogy. The moment it is a weak analogy, it becomes faulty. You can be criticized for the fallacy of using faulty analogy. So in this argument from design, let us see whether this analogy is strong or a weak one. The British empirical philosopher David Hume, according to him, he says that there are very important dissimilarities between the artifact, like a watch, and the universe. One of the important and crucial dissimilarity or difference is that we have the experience of artisans making artifacts, but we don't have any experience witnessed by anyone with regard to the creation of a universe. And perhaps we will never be able to witness any such thing. So therefore, even if there are some similarities between artifacts and universe, their argumentative force is powerfully countered by relevant dissimilarities. That makes this analogy a weak analogy. So with this, I conclude today's lecture. So if you have got any question, you can ask me. I'm sure you would have some questions. But these are some of the important philosophical tools that you need to keep in mind, and then by repeatedly engaging with them, you will be able to make use of them in your own research. Thank you very much. So with that, I conclude today's lecture, and we will take up a few questions after this. Thank you.